Well, hello and welcome to this Pre-IMARC webinar focusing on the use of renewable fuels to help miners drive towards their decarbonisation targets. I'm Richard Roberts, Editorial Director at Beacon Events, and it's a pleasure today to be speaking with the CEO of Bioenergy Australia, Shahana McKenzie, and the founder of VM Industrials, Francisco Malta. Welcome to you both.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having us.
Hi, thank you very much for having us.
I'm going to let Shahana and Francisco introduce their organisations in a minute, but this year's Australian federal budget put an increased focus on accelerating development of a viable domestic renewables fuel industry with a range of new measures. The Sustainable Aviation Fuel Alliance of Australia and New Zealand and the Cleaner Fuel Alliance described the measures as no less than a signal to global investors that Australia is open for business. The two groups said that given 45% of Australia's total energy use is from liquid fuels, a more urgent focus on renewable liquid fuels was critical to the nation's decarbonisation plans. Shahana, you were instrumental in the creation of the Sustainable Aviation Fuel and Cleaner Fuel Alliance, Fuels Alliances, after you joined Bioenergy Australia in 2017. Can you just provide a brief intro on the organisation and maybe talk about how you see Australia's bioeconomy position, in a global context? Where are we making progress and where are we sort of lagging a bit?
Well, thank you so much firstly for the invitation to have me here. Really appreciate it. Bioenergy Australia, so we're the industry association for Australia's future bioeconomy. Our members range from the entire supply chain, you could imagine. So from feedstock providers such as the grain industry, the sugar milling industry, the meat processing industry, all the way through to the off-takers. And in the middle, we have the technology providers, the project developers, the investors, the government representatives, anything and everything you could possibly imagine. Our alliances were created around 4 years ago, and it was off the back of the release of the Bioenergy Roadmap, which really pointed to a couple of key priority pathways in Australia. The first was renewable liquid fuels, and in particular drop-in solutions such as sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel, but also biodiesel and ethanol as feedstocks into those. And then secondly, renewable gas. So we have some key alliances that are working in this space that are really seeking to drive the agenda forward. The Sustainable Aviation Fuels Alliance and the Cleaner Fuels Alliance have actually just merged, and they are now the Low Carbon Fuels Alliance of Australia and New Zealand. Now, that alliance has over 300 representatives that participate, and it's charged with advocating to government at the federal and state level, but working with government more so to really ensure that we can capitalise on the opportunity that we have in Australia for liquid fuels. The Bioenergy Roadmap showed some really remarkable things, such as we could supply 18% of Australia's aviation fuel market by 2030 based on favourable market conditions. And more recently, the CSIRO released a feedstock report which showed that in 2025, Australia will have 60% of the amount of feedstock required to supply 60% of Australia's aviation fuel market. And by 2050, we have 90%. Now, with all of these sectors, and in particular these hard to abate sectors, Australia is heavily reliant on liquid fuels. So currently our energy, 45% of Australia's domestic energy use comes from liquid fuels, and sectors such as marine, heavy haulage, mining, rail, construction and infrastructure, aviation and others are heavily fuel reliant and will be out to 2050 and beyond. So we've been working with the government to really ensure that we can capitalise on this opportunity. Australia has more feedstock than anybody else in the region. We are seen as being leaders in this space for our region, to be able to supply our region. And our off-takers, our major industries in Australia are absolutely advocating for us to set up this domestic industry so that we are able to supply that domestically, and we're able to really manage the credibility of that fuel and ensure that the certificates of those fuels are meeting the highest emissions and sustainability principles that we possibly can. But also just in relation to us having that fuel security moving forward. Renewable fuels are the future, and for us to be developing that domestic industry is essential for our own fuel security needs.
Okay, and just maybe as a segue to Francisco, a minute, how significant, where does the mining industry sort of fit into this? How would you characterize it? How significant is it as a potential large-scale biofuel user going forward?
Is that for me? Sorry, Richard.
No, sorry, that was just for Shahana, just to finish off. I just wondered if your connection with the mining and metal space, just to sort of characterize it as a component in this before I throw over to Francisco.
Yeah, look, I mean, in relation to Australia's mining sector, and particularly over in WA, it is heavily reliant on liquid fuels. Some of the first batches of renewable diesel that have arrived in country, I think we're up to around 15 batches now that have arrived in country. Over half of those have actually been used on mining operations. So whether they are safeguard entities or whether they are organisations that have global or domestic commitments for decarbonisation, organisations right across the globe that are operating in mining have done demonstrations, have done pilots using renewable diesel, using biodiesel. We have some mining operations in Australia that have been running on 100% biodiesel in their operations. It is essential. Mining is going to need diesel beyond 2050, and having that domestically produced is absolutely essential.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry about that confusion. Francisco Malta, you started VM Industrials in 2013. The firm is part of Canada's Aderco group, which I understand treats about 40 billion litres of fuel a year in mining, transport, marine, and other sectors around the world with fuel additives. Can you just give us a brief background on VM Industrials and your connection or connections with the mining industry?
Yeah, of course. So we founded VM Industrials in 2013. The sole objective of VM Industrials has been to bring Aderco to the region, so Australia and New Zealand. As you mentioned, Aderco is a chemical manufacturer. It's I think still today the only manufacturer of 100% green fuel additives. So that's renewable, sustainable, and we're treating. The background has always been treating heavy fuel oils because, in effect, they're the most troubled fuels that we came across. But actually, over the years, we've started to actually improve a lot of fossil fuels. So we're treating mines, we're treating power generation, automotive. We're in, I believe, over 1,000 fuel stations in Spain. So we're really in that automotive space. Now, I guess what we bring as VM Industrials is presenting these benefits to Australia, but we're also very aware about the change and the biofuels coming through. We're spending a lot of time around that space. We see that as being the most practical drop in, as you mentioned, Shahana. It's don't need to change. These assets are going to be with us for a good 30, 40 years. And that transition is going to have this bridge. So we're spending a lot of time, and we're very successful in helping people utilize these fuels safely and removing the risks.
Okay, and in terms of the IMARC discussion, I understand you'll be speaking about the immediate sort of decarbonisation measures that miners can take today with their existing assets and fuels. Francisco, where is this happening? What's a good example of that?
Look, a good example is we started discussions many years ago with Alcoa Group in West Australia. We went through a lot of hoops and hurdles. I would say the additive world is a little bit unknown, and it took us a lot of I guess hand holding and education for miners to take us seriously. The Alcoa Group now is treating 3 of their mines with our products. What we found is with fossil fuels as they are today, with just the 5%, let's say, maximum biodiesel, the inconsistencies are there enough for an open cut mine to save over 5% fuel efficiency. So that for us is direct decarbonisation using a green product. So our customers can hold their hand up high and say, hey, we've just introduced this and look what we're getting. And we're getting those results time and time again. They change depending on the workloads, and underground mines will get better results. But in Australia, we're working with fuel stations through Inland Petroleum. We're working with the Spirit of Tasmania, have used us for almost 4 or 5 years. So we're slowly becoming quite a let's say a growth prospects are improving, and we continue to have opportunities to get into that space. But it is decarbonisation today, what can be done with what you have. We're super excited, of course, because as biofuels come in, products like ours become even more imperative because they solve exactly the same issues, and we can see that growth prospect.
Brilliant. So just to both of you, and Shahana, I'll start with you. The measures that were announced by the government early this year, how important were some of the measures, and how do they provide a meaningful boost to progress?
Yeah, look, I mean, I suppose firstly, if we're really focusing on the opportunity for mining and decarbonisation of mining, I think there's two kind of primary options here. So the first is around biodiesel, obviously, which would be considered more of a first generation renewable fuel. And the blend limitations on that are, warranties will provide you a 5% or a 7% biodiesel blend without having to do anything. Now, there are many mining operations across globally which have extended that out through working with their, with their facilitator of machinery to take that to a B20, which is acceptable in some environments. I suppose the difference that we see with renewable diesel is meeting the mineral diesel standard. So Australia is currently going through the process of having that implemented. So we will have a renewable diesel standard that will be legislated by the end of this year. Now, there's only one slight change from the mineral diesel standard, but effectively it achieves the mineral diesel standard. So what that means is there is no blend limitation on that fuel. So a mining operator can put as much renewable diesel as they want into their operations as possible to be able to support their decarbonisation. And we're talking about through a life cycle analysis of the fuel, we're talking about sometimes in excess of 90% reduction in emissions through life cycle analysis. So this is massive. And if we're talking about a 10% blend, you're looking at a 10% reduction in your fuel emissions over that period of time. So these two fuels are the ones we're talking about, right? If we look to what the federal government announced in May, it was our shopping list. We got everything we could possibly want, which was great. So the first thing that we received was additional funding to go to ARENA. So the Future Made in Australia, very, very focused funding going to ARENA to look at feasibility studies, pre-feasibility studies, demonstrations, and matched capital funding to get things going, right? So we've got that first 1.7 billion was announced, and a proportion of that going to low carbon liquid fuels. So that's the first piece that we received. The second was around focused funding for a certificate of origin scheme specifically for renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. Now, that is essential as we move to a world of tradable certificates, right? Book and claim, where fuel is being made in one location, but it's being traded like we do right now for green electricity, right? You don't know when you turn on your power if you're using a green electron or a fossil-based electron. The same is going to happen with fuel. So that funding was announced by the federal government to really design that system in Australia so that we can capitalise on that. In addition to that, funding was afforded to seek out and to work with industry across all industries on what role does government need to play to accelerate this sector. So on demand side support, so looking at things such as interventions around mandates, around low carbon fuel standards, what other options have been taken in other jurisdictions to really accelerate and create that demand certainty for projects. On the flip side to that, or supporting that, is what is the government's role in supply side support? So is it around contracts for difference, in reducing that premium of the fuel? Is it around production credits or tax credits? What is the role in supply support to really reduce the cost? So the government announced all of those measures, which is fantastic. In addition to that, on the 1st of July this year, which is very relevant to the mining sector because this is one of the areas which is actually using this already, the government announced a market-based mechanism for ENGAs, for renewable liquid fuels, renewable diesel and SAF predominantly. So what that means is that where there is shared infrastructure and renewable diesel or biodiesel is going into that facility or sustainable aviation fuel, and it's going to multiple parties, but only one of those parties, let's say, has paid for that renewable fuel. What it allows through this market-based mechanism is that party that has paid for the fuel is actually able to count the emissions reduction. It doesn't have to be spread across every single player, which is how traditionally ENGAS has worked. So that came into force on the 1st of July this year and is already being used in mining operations at the moment, where there is that shared infrastructure and renewable fuels are being used. So they're really the measures and where we currently sit.
And Francisco, what about you? Do you have a view of the Australian government measures or initiatives? How do you sort of see the pace of change in the market here versus other markets in which Aderco operates? What are the sort of significant markers of change that you are seeing?
Yeah, Richard, I mean, look, I just got back from Singapore and all we spoke about, there was an Aderco conference with all the other agents in the region. And we were with university, the NTU, we were with other fuel experts, and all we talked about was biofuels, and there's a lot going on. So to give you an idea, so we're treating 17 mines now in Indonesia that have a B32 minimum.
Wow.
Yeah, and I can promise you that anyone else who isn't using an additive similar to ours or like ours, or biocides, which I don't think are any solution, are having nightmares. There's no doubt. But let's not forget they're using Komatsus, they're using Caterpillars, they're using exactly the same machinery as we are. So these fuels are operating. I know, Shahana, you mentioned Brazil. Brazil's a 14% mandate, I think, at the moment on diesel. Again, we're shooting through the roof there because we're solving a lot of issues. So what I find intriguing is when Australia is worried about going from 5 to 7, it can be done. And in fact, when you crunch the numbers, imagine if we went to 22%, we would get that 18 million decarbonisation of CO2 in years, not decades, not 2050. So I just see opportunity, to be honest, and I just see that we can move things. I'm no expert about the feedstocks, meaning I know the feedstocks and what the risks are associated with them, but I don't know what's going to be available in Australia. I think, Shahana, you're the expert there. But we're following very carefully all types of feedstocks. We can see from a distance exactly which ones will require more. It always comes down to the unsaturated chemical, the unsaturated molecules there. And but however, no doubt, renewable fuels, as you say, second generation, it's a whole different world. These are on paper, they're basically the best fuels you can possibly get. But you want to be HVO 100. You don't want to be blending, because once you start blending, you're back in the soup again. But the critical thing is, from what I see, and when I speak to miners, they're very reluctant to touch biofuels. I think Australia had a bad experience in the early 2000s. Maybe I'm wrong in the years, but there was some credit benefits. And I understood that B10 was manageable, and then 15 and then 20, it just all went, chaotic with lots of miners having a lot of issues with these fuels. So it's exciting that we are in this situation where the government is considering to step up these minimums, as we see in other countries. I think what is it, EU 2030 is 20% they're going to go. Is it correct, or am I right or wrong? I think it is maybe 20%. Yeah. So
Sure.
that's what we're seeing globally. I think we'll have to follow suit. And I think it's a great opportunity, as Shahana says, we can become the actual suppliers of the fuel, not only the users, which is what we are at the moment. We have tankers coming in from Singapore, all the same fuel. You know, everyone knows there's an issue with those fuels, because otherwise BP wouldn't have an ultimate, Ampol wouldn't have an amplify, you know, and Vortex wouldn't have existed. So it's all been affixed to something we all know is there. Is the problem going to get much larger when we go bio? 100%. But can it be resolved? Yeah, 100% as well.
Shahana, you've made a comment about a viable domestic renewables fuel industry. What does that look like? What are its cornerstone components?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're looking at the different generations of fuel, I think that's a really important kind of distinction to make here. If you're talking about FAME-based biodiesel, it's a very different thing in relation to the blend limitations, as opposed to, as you said, a renewable diesel or a HVO. They're two very different fuels, but they come from very similar feedstocks at the moment. So to look at Australia and specifically in this space, we export to the tune of around $4 billion a year of canola into the European Union for the production of renewable fuels. That's $4 billion a year of canola. Our export of used cooking oil from Australia to the US went up by 33,000% from 2020 to 2022. That's just used cooking oil. So if we look at, we are already supplying feedstock, and that is being produced into fuels in other jurisdictions that we are currently importing back into country. We have a massive opportunity here. And that's really if we're just looking at that first kind of generation feedstock pathway, so the fats and oils pathway. You know, tallow as a massive example. Australia produces a huge amount of tallow, which is of massive interest to this industry as well globally. But then you go into your kind of next generation fuels, right? So you're looking at the different feedstocks. So us looking at, you know, the alcohol based, so the lignocellulosic based, so the sugarcane waste, the agricultural waste, the municipal waste, looking at the forestry residues and the like. All really interesting kind of feedstocks that Australia can play a really large role in. Now, fuel isn't being supplied through those feedstock pathways yet globally at commercial scale, but there is a massive motivation by these industries to move that forward. So we're confident that that's going to really take place. And then you've got your final pathway, which is the power to liquids. You know, our renewable electricity and hydrogen to be able to support the production of you know, liquids that are effectively made from renewable electricity. So for us, there is a massive opportunity. Australia could be supplying in excess of our own domestic use, but also supporting our nations that sit alongside us in our region. And to come back to that really significant point around fuel security, this isn't just about industry. This is actually about sovereign risk. And this is about us ensuring that Australia has a level of fuel security moving forward, which is really going to de-risk us as a nation.
Francisco, technology, what's shifting, what's changing for you on that front?
Okay, look, for us, coming back to, again, we enormous market in the past in shipping. We've always been in that space. One thing with shipping is they live and die, you know, for their fuel. So these engineers are watching their fuel very carefully. They understand fuel. What we're finding with miners is they actually just treat it as a commodity. They arrive, the fuel's there, and they fuel up and off they go. And so they're very much hands off. So what we've done is we've tried to make that very easy and practical. We've devised a dosing unit which is fully automated. It's fully closed in. It's plug and play. It's like, we call it an espresso pod, where 205 litre drum of our additive, which treats over 4 million litres, just gets put in there. Everything gets shut down. And from a distance, we can audit how much is being used, and it's additizing directly as every time a tanker comes in to fuel in. So we're trying to make it as easy as it can be for the user, understanding that, look, it's a big ask for a miner to go and change their operations. So we're just coming up with solutions to meet the market here, and it's being received well, because converting people into seeing the benefits and seeing the science and seeing what can come was only one challenge. The biggest challenge was, okay, how do we now apply it? And we've taken that approach. What we believe is also having an infrastructure like this, it's future-proofing the mine. Let's say you need to go down the path of a biofuel, tallow, a tallow or palm or whatever the feedstock. That comes with some risks. So having the ability to deal with that, and we can monitor that with them to see, okay, are we getting the results? Is this, is the fuel behaving correctly? And again, HVOs, I think, will come with other lubricity potential issues. So once again, let's say we take it as it's time that these miners have to take more interest in the fuel that they're going to have to operate with, and it's going to have to come in-house. So we're helping them with that transition to be able to mitigate those.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much to both of you. Very informative. Thanks for having this conversation ahead of IMARC in Sydney in October. We can look forward to expanding the discussion there.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Shahana. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks
Great
both.
to meet you both.
Nice to
Bye.
meet you.
Thanks.